choosing a desired position, and then we are trying to facilitate the development and maintenance of that position in the marketplace, we always want to do that with respect to our target audience's definition of value. Always with respect to what is of value to them. Whatever the unit is, the points of value or the determinants of value should be taken into consideration when we establish our desired positioning strategy. So what I want to review, in addition to defining what a position is a procedure for positioning, how you would move through the process of identifying what position you want to have, so that once we get to the design to value for an offer section of the course, you'll know what that offer must do in order to support the desired position in the marketplace. So we're going to go through that positioning procedure, and at the end of the positioning procedure, we will be able to choose what we call a grand position, or like the overarching position that we want the brand to hold in the marketplace. So our activities will be to review positioning. I'm going to explain the positioning procedure using the Summit VA hospital case. So we think about positioning. What is a brand's position? What are we talking about if we use that term? The way the brand is perceived, or the associations about the brand in the minds of the target audience, here's the key phrase, relative to the competition. Our brand position is always relative to the competition. So it only makes sense in a context. And we have to keep that top of mind as we are trying to establish our positioning strategy. And so we can say that the position answers the question, how do we want the target audience to perceive us? And then again, keep that phrase, relative to the competition. And I bring this up because when we are choosing a positioning strategy from a strategic marketing perspective, we are identifying what we want our brand to mean. And then we are building that image, building that perception in the market with all of the decisions that we make, whether it's advertising or the way our customer service works, the way our building looks, or the types of product innovations we bring out. Anything that we do with the organization, any kind of touch point that the target audience would have with the brand, it should be establishing and reinforcing the position that we've chosen. Positioning should be a strategic decision. Now that said, it doesn't always happen that way. We want it to happen that way, but it doesn't always work. For companies to really be able to make the most of a position, they would identify the desired position and then systematically go about building it. But if we don't choose a strategic position and build that position, we will still have a position in the minds of consumers. It's still going to happen. And we call that an emergent position. So no matter what, if the target audience is aware of our brand, they will have a perception of what we mean, what we stand for, what we're like relative to the competition. The difference between a strategic position and an emergent position, though, is that the strategic position is one that we are nurturing because we know that it's going to facilitate our ability to accomplish our marketing objectives, and the emergent position is out of our control. So that's really not a situation that we want to be in. It's not necessarily the case that an emergent position is going to be a negative perception of our brand, but oftentimes that is the case. Brands that are not paying appropriate attention to the value of its position are probably also not paying attention to some other, important things. And so it may be that emergent position will tend to be negative. Now, sometimes the emergent position can come about due to crisis communication situations. And so it was something that the brand was trying to be strategic, but then some crisis occurred and an emergent position occurred. But it can also be the case that the brand is just not nurturing a a position in a systematic way. The market happened, life happened, and the target audience ended up with these perceptions of the brand. And once a negative position exists, it's very difficult to change it. And in fact, some brands give up. Essentially what they do is just change their name. They just said, we won't fight to reestablish or reposition the brand. We'll just shut down that brand name and create a new brand name. The perception of our brand in the minds of the target audience relative to the competition, and why we're studying it here is because we want to identify the best position for us to hold so that we can strategically nurture that particular position. Whatever position we choose to pursue, it should differentiate our brand from the competitor's brand. That's why we always have that relative to the competition in our positioning statement. Because if it's not differentiating us, then it's not doing what it's supposed to do. Whatever it is that we're using to differentiate us, it should maximize perceived value in the minds of the target audience. And for that reason, it ends up being like a win-win relationship. Our brand is distinctive from the competition, and at the same time, the target audience that we're pursuing recognizes that they get more value from us than they would from our competition. We might do this in two different situations. One is if we're establishing a position for the first time, like we're launching a new brand, or if we are realigning our strategy, establishing new marketing strategies, then we might reevaluate this positioning procedure to determine if we need to reposition our brand. So in both of those situations, we could go through this procedure. First step in the positioning procedure is to identify the drivers, the value drivers that are important to the target audience. So what values, with respect to this type of product category or this type of purchase decision, what values are most relevant to the target audience? And even though there might be, much like our segmentation variables, there could be many, many things on this list of value drivers, probably there is a somewhat short list of values that are the focus or really the key elements to making a purchase decision. That's step one. Hypothetically, in this case, I have identified 6 value drivers that a prospective patient might use in choosing which hospital to go to for a medical procedure. And they're along the line here. So personal service, convenience, reputation, safety, price, and comfort. Those are the 6 that hypothetically I chose. What I would really do if I was doing this research is have some focus groups where we talk about the decision, this type of decision, and we discuss the value drivers that come up. So that would allow me to get a list of the value drivers. Then I would conduct a survey with a sample reflecting the population of my target audience, and I would ask them to explain or to rate the relative importance of each of the value drivers in the survey relative to each other. And so from that, I would be able to determine what are the most important value drivers, and I would be able to get some figures that I could use in a graph like the one you see on your screen now. So again, hypothetically, imagine that I did my focus groups and I identified these 6 value drivers, and then I ran my survey and I was able to get an estimate between 0 and 10 of the relative importance of these value drivers to the target audience. Key value. When you're looking across these 6, initially you might think, oh wow, safety is the most important thing. So maybe we want to position on safety. Whenever we are looking at these values, we could categorize the values into motivator values or hygiene factors. So motivation factors, they would drive behavior. They're going to drive choice. And so those are the kinds of things that we might want to base our position on. But for a hygiene factor, it means that no brand will be able to survive in that market unless it can match that value. And so in other words, we cannot differentiate on that value because every competitor must have it in place in order just to continue to operate. No one's going to choose to go to a hospital that they perceive to be unsafe. So safety is a must-have, and it cannot be what we position ourselves on. Perceived as being safe, and all the other brands will be perceived as being safe. And that maybe that we need to communicate safety cues, because it is indeed very important, but we're not going to position the brand on that. We're not going to tie our brand meaning to safety. We're going to tie it to something that is more motivational relative to our competition. In step 2, we would map the perceptions of the target audience for our brand and for one primary competing brand. So in other words, we're going to say, what position do we hold now, and what position does one of our competitors hold in the target audience's mind? And like I did for assessing the importance of the values, I would also do this with survey data. And so there'd be a section of the survey that says, to what extent do you associate Summit VA Hospital with personal service? And it'd be like a scale of. So I would do that for each of the value drivers that I'm assessing for my brand and for one competing brand. And that's what I have on the slide in front of you now. So the green line is the Mayo Clinic, and the red line is Summit VA. Again, it's hypothetical. I made up the data. But imagine that what we found when we said, how do you perceive us? How do you perceive Mayo? There are some things that we won on with respect to those value drivers, and some things that Mayo did better. So you can see, for instance, that Mayo is definitely perceived as having a better reputation than Summit VA. It's also perceived as being more safe, but that gap is much smaller than the reputation gap. In terms of price, Summit VA is considered to be better than Mayo. That's because the price is lower. We're perceived as having much better personal service than Mayo. So you can see here the gaps of where we may be able to leverage against the competition. But we also have to take this into consideration in context with the relative importance of those value drivers. So now what I've done is to overlay the first chart with the second chart. And so this helps us to see more clearly what value we might want to leverage as a position. For instance, safety was the most important thing, but it's a hygiene factor. We're not going to want to position on it, but it is still a hygiene factor, and Mayo is perceived as being more safe than us, and so we may want to still have some marketing communications or some facility decisions that help to reinforce a message of safety so that we can narrow that gap on that important hygiene factor. Then if we look at the others to see what might we position on as a differentiation strategy, Summit VA is great at personal service, but personal service isn't that important. Should that be taken out of the running because it's not that important, or should it still be considered? Summit VA is far outperforming on price relative to importance, and Mayo is underperforming. One thing I would consider is, why would I give away that money then? If this gap between importance and my performance on price, that kind of overperformance gap, could I narrow that gap and be able to increase my margin while still being perceived as the best price option? That we can differentiate, and that's important to the target audience, and then we can go out into the marketplace and hammer that home, reinforce over and over and over again what we are and why people would choose us. Summit VA can really build in the idea of an experience, and user experience. All of these other areas that are traditionally such a hassle with medical care, that really could be a differentiating and motivating value. You see a situation where something's not important, but yet you're performing really well on it. What to do is say, you know what, this target audience thinks that it's not important, but maybe it's because they never really thought about it before. Maybe we should take time to communicate why this value should be important, and once we've convinced them that it is, we're already the winner. We're already the best performer on that particular value. So it goes back to, again, that notion. So we would go through those steps, identifying the value drivers, assessing their relative importance to the target audience, mapping how we are perceived on those values, mapping how our competitors are perceived on those values, and then analyzing where we have the gaps and what we might could use as a motivating factor for a position. Once we've gone through that analysis, what we want to do is to select a grand position. And when you think about what a grand position is, I like to think of it like the flag that we're waving. It is the symbol of what our brand means. It is one space in the market that our brand owns, and no other competitor can take that meaning from us. It's ours, our flag in the ground. Advertising vocabulary, we would call this a preemptive claim. Preemptive meaning that the brand has preempted the competition from making the same claim. So they made it first. Say we made it first, we preempted the competition. If they then make the same claim that we made, again, whatever preemptive claim we choose, it should be a motivational value, not a hygiene value. Summarized in one word. What comes to mind when you think of blank? The word that comes to mind is that brand's primary position. So let's practice. Here on the screen we have 6 automotive brands. Notice that among these 6 brands, they are all luxurious. They're all expensive. They really all have differentiated brand meanings. And that differentiated brand meaning is their position. The position that brand holds is going to make it have a level of congruence with its target audience, such that people who value that position most are going to choose one brand over another brand. Volvo owns the perception of safety in the automotive industry, and it has for decades now. I find it especially interesting that if you look at safety reports for the last several years, it doesn't actually appear that Volvo is any more safe than any of these other brands. Some brands might even outperform Volvo on safety, but it doesn't matter because the target audience perceives Volvo to have the greatest safety. Volvo had a campaign that won an award at Cannes. Campaign was actually for a product it created called Volvo created a can of spray paint that was like a reflective paint. So if I'm a cyclist and I'm cycling at night, I wouldn't need to worry so much about having a reflective jacket. I would take this life paint and spray it on myself, and then I'm going to be easy to see by drivers. So they actually created this paint, this reflection paint that people spray on themselves, and they sold it. And in fact, they sold out of it. And again, you might be thinking, why in the world would Volvo have a reflective paint for cyclists? Well, again, it goes to that notion of safety. Volvo was basically protecting its drivers by ensuring that they were better able to see cyclists on the road at night. See, the connection goes right to that safety component. When you think about class, all of these brands, they're all luxury brands, so they all have a status to them. They all have, a sense of class or affluence to them. So they're all in that substitutable product category, and yet they all have a meaning, a position that's different in the marketplace. Audi is headed towards establishing a position as the most sustainable car brand, or technology for the purpose of environmental sustainability. Each of these brands would have chosen a value they perceive the target audience to have, that they could differentiate themselves on relative to this competitive class that they're operating in. Mercedes is the classic choice. Mercedes is the one that knew luxury before any of them. The point being that even in this incredibly competitive market where none of these brands would be a bad choice for an affluent consumer who wants a luxury car. All great choices. And yet, the person who wants luxurious safety is going to choose Volvo. And the person who wants luxurious driving performance is going to choose BMW. And the person who wants reliable luxury is going to choose Lexus, and so on. And so that is the meaning of positioning. We can align our brand's position, if we've chosen it well, align our brand's position with the value that motivates purchase behavior in our target audience, And once we have that alignment process of exchange, the purchase, the sales, and the market share is going to flow much more efficiently and effectively. All of these fast food restaurants have to be fast. Fast is a hygiene quality, because by definition, that's why people go there, because they want something quick. So they're all fast, but all of them also stand for something in addition to fast. They have a position that is, or should be, unique and differentiated in the marketplace. So let's say McDonald's is quick, and McDonald's is an example too, though, a brand that has been somewhat a victim of an emergent position. Subway says healthier fresh, and every image in any of the ads or any of the signage or any of the stores shows fresh produce. So all of the cues that the target audience receives from Subway is fresh, fresh, fresh.